Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us on the 10th day of the historic impeachment trial for Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, a day that brought impassioned closing arguments from both sides. And here to unpack everything that was said during those closing arguments are two Austin attorneys who have been kind enough to share their wisdom and insights with us, Thomas Just and Jarrod Smith. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to start by asking both of you, Thomas, what were your impressions of closing arguments by both the House prosecution and Ken Paxton's defense team?
Well, I'll start with Busby. There's an old saying that we have, when the law is on your side, pound the law. When the facts are on your side, pound the facts. And when neither of them are with you, pound the table. And there was a lot of pounding the table in terms of the politics here, which, in a normal courtroom, that's not going to work. But in this case, given that it's a political trial, that's probably a pretty effective angle for him to take. As far as the state went, I thought they did okay. They tried to go through each article and give the senators enough facts for them to hang their hat on. Whether or not that carries the day is yet to be determined.
How about you, Jarrod? Your impressions?
I think both sides did a good job in closing and did what they had to do. Tony Busby was very animated as usual. I think he did his best to show doubt. Andrew Murr gave a typical prosecutor closing argument, kind of walking everyone through the evidence, playing clips. I think Jeff Leach was very powerful, though. A very close friend of Paxton, a very staunch Republican. You could tell it was difficult for him to be up there. I think most jurors and senators likely have made up their mind before closing. This is not a typical fair and impartial jury. It's a political process. But if anything's going to swing them, I think someone like Jeff Leach could.
Yeah, Thomas, I wanted to ask both of you about that specifically. So I'm glad Jarrod mentioned it. What were your impressions of the House bringing up Jeff Leach to have the literal last word?
I thought that was effective, right? Because he's able to speak to his personal relationship with General Paxton and how far they go back, and how painful this is for him to go forward with this. That's a powerful argument to be able to say, as much as I like the guy and I've been a supporter, I can't brook this. This is a bridge too far. So I thought that was interesting. Didn't see that one coming, but that's an interesting take. It was a good argument.
So just to sort of take a larger step back, as an attorney, as you were getting ready to make a closing argument, one of the things that I've tried to use these programs for is to just educate us, take us behind the curtain a little bit. So Jarrod, when you were preparing a closing argument, how do you do that calculation? What to say, what not to say, what to highlight, what not to highlight? Walk us through sort of your thought process.
I think you want to start strong and you want to end strong. And then also, I think you want to go through each piece of evidence that the prosecution had and show where there's reasonable doubt. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, so that's what I do. When I was a prosecutor, I used obviously a different approach. But, I think that's what the defense did in this case as well. I think Tony Busby went through a lot of the different arguments the prosecution was making and tried to poke holes in them one by one. And that's what you have to do as a defense lawyer. Sometimes you do pound the table. I think he was definitely pounding the table. And that's what we do too sometimes. I mean, we get up there and we say, there's reasonable doubt here, there's reasonable doubt there. And, you have to acquit based on that. Sometimes what I even do is I even tell juries, like, look, you can be clearly convinced. You can be preponderance of the evidence. But as long as you have a doubt based on reason, you have to acquit, even though you might not like that, even though that maybe doesn't make you feel well, you still have to do it. That's what the law is. And I think that's kind of where Busby was getting to.
Yeah. And Thomas, the same question for you. What sorts of calculations do you make?
Typically, whether or not you're on either side, you want to tell a story. and you want to put together a narrative that puts your facts in the best light, and minimizes the other sides. The other thing is that normally in a real trial, in the beginning during voir dire, when we're picking jury members, we will hammer home, especially as defense attorneys, what the standard of proof is and what beyond a reasonable doubt, how they should be thinking about that. We're technically not allowed to give a definition of it, but we can get people talking and try to stress just how high of a level that is. In this case, you didn't have that, but to Jarrod's point, Busby was trying to point out just how difficult a burden that is. You always want to tie back to that original discussion that you had, and so he was definitely trying to get to that point because like Jarrod said, you really can tell people, listen, we have preponderance of the evidence, we have clear and convincing, and then we have beyond a reasonable doubt. And clear and convincing is the standard of proof to take your kids away, whereas beyond a reasonable doubt is even above that. So think about how much, how high that is. And so, that is, really something that you want to hammer home.
Let me ask both of you this. I mean, certainly we saw, and we talked about this a little bit, but I just want to hone in on it a bit more. Certainly we saw, Tony Busby taking almost an evangelical, as though he was a evangelical minister or something, just this very animated approach. And then much more of a drier, definite approach by Andrew Murr, State Representative Andrew Murr. Does that matter in the end? In other words, the performative nature or lack of performative nature. I mean, certainly people's personalities are different as well, but can the performative nature sometimes backfire, or did Andrew Murr need to add some more octane to his comments?
I think, Tony Busby was doing what Tony Busby typically does. He's a showman. Everyone has their own different style. That's not necessarily my style, but I think it works for him, and you have to do what works for you. And, to go back, I mean, it is a political process. He's speaking to those senators and those jurors, and he's also speaking to their constituents. From my own calculation, there's about 7 or 10 possible Republican swing votes, and I think the defense needs to swing between 2 to 4 of them. It's very possible they do. There's a ton of outside political pressure, and that's kind of what Tony Busby's speaking to. I am surprised, though, that there wasn't a little bit more gusto from Andrew Murr and the prosecution. I'm also surprised we didn't hear from Rusty Hardin as well.
Do you think that both sides landed the proverbial plane here?
It's hard to say because, normally we would evaluate this on, an impartial jury and, how that's going to land. And, assuming we did a good job with voir dire, here you don't have that, right? And so, to Jarrod's point, this is purely a political analysis for a lot of these senators that are on the fence. And a lot of these senators also had their minds made up before they even sat down and heard any of the evidence. We saw some of that.
We saw that with them. Yes.
Right. And so it's really hard to say if they landed the plane. Busby really was going after that political argument. The state touched on it a little bit, but mostly tried to, treat it like a straight-laced, prosecutor would in a normal trial. And so, to be determined at this point.
Jarrod, your just in your final thoughts on whether or not they successfully landed, each party landed what they wanted to.
I agree with Thomas. With the prosecution, they presented it like you were in a normal trial, and I think Tony Busby was playing to his audience. I mean, this is a political process. I think overall, with the House or with the prosecution, I think they're their closing was good, but their case was a little disjointed. You know, did they connect the dots is going to be a big question. There was no smoking gun, even though you don't need that in a trial, but they might have needed that in a political trial. And I think that events, you know, tried to really hammer home regarding the home renovations, showing proof that those actually were paid for by Paxton. Kamik, you know, the elected AG has the right to appoint him. The campaign donation was small. So I think both sides landed the plane, but I think the plane was landed a little bit more smoothly by Tony Buzbee in the defense.
Thomas Just and Jarrod Smith, both Austin attorneys, thank you so much for your insight and again spending some time with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.